So what happens next? Well, UGA PD leave, and they really got nothing other than a peeping Tom incident that had occurred on campus at 7:57 a.m. And I'm going to talk to you about that one last. So what they do is, it is a combination of good police work and luck, pure luck. But they start dumpster diving. ACCPD is dumpster diving, UGA PD is dumpster diving, GBI is dumpster diving, FBI is dumpster diving. Everybody is just looking into every dumpster in the Athens area for anything because they had nothing. And at a dumpster, at an apartment complex where he lived, a police officer named Zach Davis of ACCPD finds this hoodie jacket. And when he looks in and sees it, it's in a recycling bin and it's standing out because it's right on top. And he noticed it had long, dark hair on it, wrapped around one of the buttons, and he could see blood. And he thought that was suspicious. So he calls UGA PD. They respond at 9 o'clock on the day of Laken's murder. They collect the jacket found in the dumpster, and they send it immediately to the GBI crime lab indicator for testing. But while they're there, they notice, they look around and see that one of the residents in this apartment in B32 had what's called a Eufy camera, which is like a Ring camera but works a little different, had a camera aimed at that dumpster. And so they asked the resident that night, hey, can we come in? Can we see your camera? He agreed to let them see it, and this is what they saw. At 9:44 in the morning, about 15 minutes after Laken Riley's heart stopped, this is what they see. So they saw an individual who they did not know who it was at the time, dump the jacket in the dumpster and go to those bushes there and dump something there. So they go to the bushes, and this video has been enhanced, and I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of testimony about this video, enhanced the best they could by GBI Cyber. And I know the court sat through some motions to suppress where this black Adidas hat, there was a lot of discussion about, and you're going to hear more about all of those things. But this is an image that they locked in on and began to circulate around the neighborhood, or as the cops call a bolo. Be on the lookout for this individual. They didn't know who he was, and they circulated that. But they did go also that night, still the night of February 22nd, to the bushes, and they found 3 black disposable kitchen gloves, and those gloves were also sent immediately to the crime lab. And one of the interesting things about the black disposable gloves, when they got to the crime lab and they were analyzed, this is a picture taken at the crime lab, is that on the thumb of the gloves there was a hole. There's also other holes in the gloves, and they found them, but on the thumb area of one of the gloves that the crime lab examined, they found a hole. And they also found blood, and that blood was later to be determined to be Laken Riley's blood on those gloves. So I've already told you about the geographic locations. They're all clustered. You can see in this map, the crime scene is up top in the middle, called body crime scene. The dumpster where the items were found is marked. Building S is right by the bus stop, and then Laken Riley lived further up, Millage Avenue, towards the top of this photo. But the distance between the Building S, which will become important, and Laken Riley's body is about 300 yards. The distance between the dumpster and Laken Riley's body is about 500 yards. And the distance between the dumpster and the bus stop, and where the defendant lived, because he lived in that apartment complex, is about 150 yards. Everything is close together. So what happened next in the investigation is that the very next morning, on Friday, February 23rd at 8:32 a.m. as ACCPD, again, is just looking out for anything. They had the bolo at that point. They encounter a person named Diego Ibarra. And Diego Ibarra is wearing a black Adidas hat that has some interest to them, which is they believe to be the identical hat that they had seen in the video the night before. And I will tell you this, on that hat that Diego Ibarra was wearing the next day is Laken Riley's blood. So their theory that that was in fact the same hat was absolutely correct. So they encounter Diego Ibarra. He gives them a fake green card. They know it's fake because it has 2 different dates of birth on it. And so they ask him to go back to his residence, and they begin talking to him. UGAPD arrives, and they begin to take over the scene. From the information that they had gotten from Diego Ibarra, they knew that hat was a hat seen in the video because of the proximity of the crime. And at some point, Diego began telling them he's got brothers in the house sleeping, and there were many communication difficulties at first because the first responding officers did not speak Spanish. No one in this apartment, D126, could speak English. So at some point, UGA brought 2 of their Spanish-speaking officers on scene, and the communication became a little easier. Officer Bridges, Officer Sand, both of whom are native speakers of Spanish, arrived and began taking over the communications. When they get there, they are attempting to secure the residence for a warrant, and before they could do a security sweep to secure the residence for a warrant, Jose Ibarra, who's in the middle in this slide, comes out with a garbage bag in his hand. He eventually gives officers consent to enter the residence, and when Sergeant Epps enters the residence, he sees Jose Ibarra asleep in the bed. And that is how he's been identified in this case. You will see there are 5 residents that lived in apartment D126. Jose Antonio Ibarra, this defendant, also goes by the name of Victor, which will be important because a lot of the communications within his phone and some of the witnesses just call him Victor. So Jose Ibarra is Victor. It is in fact the same person. Diego Ibarra is Jose's older brother, goes by the name of El Gocho, is a nickname that many people, including this defendant, call him El Gocho. Argenis goes by Manny, and Rosbelli Flores Bello goes by La Gorda, and then Juan Carlos Diaz Hernandez they call Carlito. And I suspect the state will tell you right now you're going to hear from Rosbelli in that residence. You will also hear that all the residents, Diego, Argenis, and Rosbelli, at least those 3, are currently in federal custody, some immigration issues, but we are going to produce Rosbelli to testify to the court about the things that she saw and observed that day. And it is Rosbelli who identifies Jose Ibarra from the dumpster video. The officers, when they saw Jose Ibarra that day, saw that he had many injuries to him. Scratches on his arm, scratches on his wrist, scratches on the back of his neck, scratches on his hand. And they photographed those injuries to him. And then they began to do an additional canvass of this entire apartment complex. There are multiple buildings in this apartment complex, A, B, C, D, and E. Multiple teams of agents began going around looking for cameras, talking to residents. What do they know? What do they not know? And one of the things that they found is that the Ibarras lived at D126. Right next to them is D125, and right next to D125 is D124. 124 had a ring camera, 125 had a still camera. And they went and collected videos from those 2 apartments. And importantly, on the day that Laken Riley was murdered, at 10:21 a.m., Jose Ibarra is captured on D124 coming out of his apartment with a bag, and now his clothes have changed. He's wearing different clothes than he was wearing about 40 minutes ago. And he has a bag in his hand, and he's walking towards a dumpster, another dumpster in their apartment complex. And that dumpster, by the way, had been emptied the day of the murder. So when the officers went to check that dumpster had nothing in it for them. But in the next door neighbors, still camera shot at 10:24 a.m., 3 minutes later, Jose Ibarra is walking back towards his apartment, empty-handed, nothing in his hand. So they searched the residence that day, and they found a few things of significance. Number one, they found 3 more black disposable kitchen gloves, which were sent to trace evidence for plastics and polymer examination, and they concluded that they had originated from the same source as the gloves that were recovered in the bushes. They recovered 2 of the defendant's Samsung cell phones, which you will hear some evidence out of, but they also found no bloody clothing, no bloody anything, and the shirt and the satchel that you see the defendant wearing in the video, the dumpster video, were never found. They're not in that residence. So what other forensic evidence? The parties will stipulate to the prior Daubert hearing that this court has heard, so we will not be recalling the fingerprint evidence, but we will have a stipulation with the transcript and all of the exhibits that thumbprint, the latent print that was on the phone, was sent to ACCPD that night. And eventually, the digital image of that thumbprint on Laken Riley's phone was compared to Diego Ibarra, Argenis Ibarra, Rosbelli, and Juan Carlos, and they were all excluded. They didn't leave that thumbprint behind. And it was matched to this defendant, Jose Ibarra. It is Jose Ibarra's left thumb on Laken Riley's phone. And the analyst or the expert who did that analysis testified at the Daubert hearing. He showed the court 15 points of comparison that he found, and his results were peer-reviewed by another examiner. They were peer-reviewed blind, and she agreed with him. There's also DNA in this case, and you're going to hear about 3 different types of DNA: traditional, YSTR, and true allele. All true allele is probabilistic genotyping, but it is a computer software program that deconvolutes or separates complex mixtures of DNA. That's what true allele does. But before you can go to true allele, you have to start with traditional DNA. So all of the items of evidence that you're going to hear DNA results from started with the traditional DNA. They were swabbed, they were amplified, they were quantified, all the things that you do with regular DNA. But we do have some regular DNA results in this case. First and foremost, the jacket. The jacket found in the dumpster has blood on it, and in the blood for traditional DNA is Laken Riley's DNA and this defendant's DNA, and only the 2 of them. Jose Ibarra and Laken Riley's blood are on the jacket that he dumped in the dumpster. The rocks and the trees from the crime scene, they were also processed for DNA, for latent prints, and for everything we got. But on the rocks in the tree, just Laken's DNA, Laken's blood on the rocks in the tree. They attempted at first, which is protocol, to do what's called YSTR DNA testing on Laken's fingernails. So both her left and her right hands were swabbed by the medical examiner in this case, and they were both sent to DNA for analysis. YSTR is a better fit for trying to separate male and females because only males have Y chromosomes, and so they attempted YSTR first, and they were successful. The problem with YSTR, and the officers did gather the DNA of Jose Ibarra, Diego Ibarra, and Argenis Ibarra. They are brothers, and blood brothers share the same paternal line, and they share the same YSTR profile, unless there's a genetic mutation. And what the lab found when they tested the fingernails of Laken Riley is that, first of all, the left hand, there's nothing. No DNA of any other person other than Laken. But on her right hand, there was male DNA. And for the YSTR testing that they tried first, Jose Ibarra could not be excluded as the donor of that YSTR profile, and neither could our Hennis, because again, they're blood brothers, they share the same YSTR profile. But Diego could be excluded, and that's because Diego carries a genetic mutation that the lab was able to see, and he was able to be excluded as the donor of YSTR profile underneath Laken's nails. But after the YSTR was done, it was then sent to True Allele along with a lot of other items. And when True Allele tested, and the data was sent into the True Allele program, it didn't test it, but when the data was sent into the True Allele program, True Allele excluded our Hennis as the donor. True Allele excluded Diego, who had already been excluded by STR anyway, but True Allele matched Jose Ibarra to the DNA underneath Laken's right fingernails, to this likelihood ratio, which I have before the court here. 10 billion times more probable than a coincidental match. I'll tell you, the gloves that were tested, that's all just Laken's blood, the black gloves that were in the bushes. There's a straw that was tested, that is the defendant's blood. I want to talk to you about that a little later. And then the hat, the black Adidas hat, is also Laken's blood. And then the jacket also did contact swabs. So in addition to the blood on the jacket, they did contact swabs that were sent to True Allele. And again, it's the defendant and Laken on the jacket. But importantly on this dark blue jacket, also Laken's hairs that were wrapped around the button were sent to trace evidence. They are consistent with Laken Riley's hair, and of course it's consistent with her long dark hair and all the microscopic analysis on it. Her DNA is on that jacket, so there's really no need to do DNA on the hair because her DNA is already on the jacket in the form of blood, but they looked microscopically at her hair and it was consistent with her hair. But the important thing they found about several of the hairs, I believe over 15 of them, is that they were forcibly removed from her head. They did do a sexual assault kit on Laken, and several things were tested. But the bottom line is her entire sexual assault kit was negative for male DNA. Her clothing was looked at with AP, P30, you'll hear about that. There was no semen present. However, her underwear was sent to the trace evidence section as well, where they concluded that her underwear had been forcibly torn.